Welcome to another deep dive with me. Today we're going to get into a case that initially seemed like just a really awful accident, but it turns out that things are a lot more complicated.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, and today we're looking at this article from Investeo Investor called "The Mysterious Death of Suzanne Sills: A Tragic Fall or a Calculated Murder."
oh, wow.
So,
That's a
yeah,
pretty loaded title.
it is, and that's kind of the question we're going to be looking at today is, was this death truly just an accident, or was there something else going on here, something more sinister at play?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think in this case particularly, it really shows how crucial it is to look beyond the surface
Yeah.
and and how easily we can be misled by those first impressions. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. So let's start out with that 911 call.
Okay.
It's from a Dr. Scott Sills. He's a fertility doctor, and he found his wife Suzanne unresponsive at the bottom of the stairs in their home.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, in San Clemente. And when he calls 911, he's performing CPR as instructed by the dispatcher. But,
Yeah.
um, sadly, by the time that help arrives, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're listening to that 911 call, like, what was your initial impression of the situation be?
Probably, just a terrible tragedy, like a freak accident. Dr. Sills sounds really calm and collected on the call. And, they knew Suzanne had a history of migraines, so
Yeah.
it's easy to see how someone might think, she just lost her balance, maybe fell down the stairs. And sadly, that was it.
Yeah, definitely seems reasonable. But things start to get a little more complicated when we look at the scene at the house.
Okay.
So investigators found bruises on Suzanne's body, and then this kind of strange assortment of items near her body: a stainless steel pot, an empty medication bottle,
Mm.
her purse,
Hmm.
almost as if things have been knocked over in a struggle. And then there's the scarf.
Oh, the scarf. Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The scarf was found around Suzanne's neck, and the medical examiner actually discovered a ligature mark. Yeah, so a ligature mark is basically a mark left by something, constricting the neck.
Oh, I see.
So this finding really suggests strangulation, which shifted the whole investigation,
Right.
from an accidental death to a possible homicide.
Wow, that's a big change.
Yeah.
So finding a ligature mark like that, how does that impact an investigation?
It's a huge deal. I mean,
Uh,
because, determining the cause of death is like super crucial, and the presence of a ligature mark is a major red flag.
yeah,
It means that investigators have to now consider the possibility that someone intentionally harmed Suzanne.
right, right. And now, of course, investigators have to consider every possibility, no matter how unlikely.
Right.
So one of the theories that came up was that maybe the family dogs had something to do with the scarf,
Oh,
potentially like an accidental strangulation.
okay.
What do you think about that theory?
Well, I think it's natural for investigators to, explore every angle, even the ones that seem a little far-fetched.
Right.
You have to eliminate all possibilities to avoid what they call tunnel vision.
Yeah.
In this case, though, there was no evidence to suggest that the dogs pulled the scarf with enough force to cause that kind of injury. So that theory lost its traction. Tunnel vision, by the way, is a term used to describe a cognitive bias where you get so focused on one possibility that you might overlook other, crucial information.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
You really have to consider everything, even if it seems unlikely, to be sure that it's a thorough investigation.
Exactly.
So the dog theory is pretty much ruled out, and the focus kind of shifts back to Dr. Sills and the nature of their relationship.
Okay.
Initially, he was just viewed as, the grieving husband.
Right.
But then some inconsistencies in his story start to come to light.
And this is where those seemingly, unimportant details like, background information and personal relationships, those become incredibly important in an investigation.
I see.
Like, for example, the Sills children mentioned overhearing their parents arguing the night before Suzanne died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And one of your arguments was at 4 back in the morning?
Oh, my God.
Apparently, they were arguing about Suzanne working late on her laptop,
Mm.
something that Dr. Sills thought was contributing to her migraines.
Mm.
It's just strange to think about a seemingly ordinary couple arguing at 4 a.m., isn't it?
Yeah, it does seem odd.
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is that this, seemingly trivial argument about late night work could point towards a possible motive.
Right.
This glimpse into their marital tension adds like a whole other layer to the investigation.
It's amazing how a small detail like that can certainly become a key piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It really highlights how important it is to understand the full context of the situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating how, like, these seemingly insignificant details can completely transform, like, the whole trajectory of an investigation. It's like
Yeah.
a ripple effect.
Absolutely. And as investigators are digging deeper into Dr. Sills' account, those inconsistencies we were talking about earlier, those become even more glaring.
Hmm.
For example, there's, the bruises on Suzanne's body.
Right.
They didn't quite match up with what you'd expect to see from, just a simple fall down the stairs.
Yeah, you're right. The nature and location of the bruises definitely raised concerns. And
Yeah.
and don't forget those other items that were found near her body, like the pot, the medication bottle, her purse.
Right.
The presence of those things just added another layer of complexity to the whole scene.
It's like you're trying to put together a puzzle, but like some of the pieces fit and others just don't belong.
Exactly.
Was it a chaotic accident or was there something more deliberate happening?
Right. And then there were the discrepancies in Dr. Sills' timeline.
Okay.
Like when he claimed to have last seen his wife alive,
Right.
what he said happened that night. It wasn't adding up.
So we have a ligature mark that indicates potential strangulation, a heated argument that was overheard by the children, this chaotic scene at the bottom of the stairs, and now Dr. Sills' story is starting to unravel.
Right.
So given all of this, how do you think investigators were viewing that initial theory of an accidental fall at this point?
Well, as you can imagine, those initial assumptions were being seriously challenged.
Yeah.
The evidence was starting to point towards a very different scenario.
Sort of possible scenario where, that argument about Suzanne's late night work maybe escalated, maybe even turned violent.
Potentially, yeah.
It's chilling to consider this seemingly ordinary couple living in, a quiet suburban neighborhood, and then there's this darkness lurking beneath the surface.
You've hit upon a really crucial point there, the importance of looking beyond the surface.
Yeah.
What may appear to be, a very straightforward accident can, upon closer examination, reveal a much more complex and disturbing truth.
Yeah.
And in this case, the investigation was shifting, from simply trying to determine what happened to understanding why it happened.
And that why often hinges on motive, right?
Exactly.
What could have driven a husband to potentially harm his wife?
Right.
Was it just a sudden burst of rage, or was it something more calculated?
Those are precisely the questions that investigators had to grapple with. Uncovering motive is often key to piecing together the events leading up to a crime.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting inside the mind of the individual involved and understanding their state of mind.
So we have a husband whose account is becoming increasingly suspect. A marriage that's fraught with tension and evidence that points to something far more sinister than just a simple fall.
Right.
So what happens next in the investigation? Where do the investigators go from here? All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the death of Suzanne Sills, and we've uncovered a lot of conflicting information.
Yeah, a lot of twists and turns in this one.
So investigators have a lot of suspicions, but what happens next? Do they have enough to actually make an arrest?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and it's where this case takes another unexpected turn.
Oh.
Despite the mounting evidence, we've got the ligature mark, the arguments, the inconsistencies in Dr. Sills' story, the investigation actually hit a roadblock.
A roadblock? What do you mean?
Well, they just couldn't find that one irrefutable piece of evidence that definitively proved Dr. Sills was responsible for Suzanne's death.
So even with all that, even with a ligature mark and the arguments that the children overheard and Dr. Sills' changing story, it still wasn't enough to file charges.
Yeah, and it highlights just how complex the legal system can be.
Yeah.
Sometimes even when you have what seems like very compelling circumstantial evidence, it's not enough to meet that high standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Think of it this way. Imagine a scale.
Okay.
On one side, you have all the evidence pointing towards guilt, and on the other side, you have the presumption of innocence.
Right.
For a conviction, that scale needs to tip heavily towards guilt, with no room for reasonable doubt.
So in this case, the scale didn't tip far enough.
Exactly. And it leaves us, and probably the investigators too, with this lingering question, what really happened to Suzanne Sills?
Yeah.
Was her death truly a tragic accident as it first appeared, or did something more sinister occur within the walls of their home?
It's a question that may never be definitively answered. But this deep dive has really shown us that things aren't always as they seem.
Absolutely.
We've seen how a seemingly simple fall down the stairs can unravel into this complex web of evidence, with conflicting accounts and hidden tensions.
This case really underscores the importance of critical thinking, looking beyond the surface and considering all possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, and that even seemingly perfect lives, they can harbor secrets and struggles that we may never fully comprehend.
Well said. And even though we may never know the complete truth about what happened to Suzanne Sills, exploring the evidence, the conflicting accounts, and those hidden tensions has been incredibly insightful.
It really has. And while the specific outcome of this case might remain a mystery, it serves as a really powerful reminder to question what we think we know, to challenge our assumptions, and to acknowledge that even in the most ordinary of settings, darkness can sometimes find a foothold.
It's a reminder that the truth is often multifaceted and that the search for it can be a long and winding road. Well, absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mysterious death of Suzanne Sills. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes the most intriguing mysteries are those that remain unsolved.